Hello, everybody. Mr. Danahauer here. As a high school teacher and an experienced presenter, I would let you know that oftentimes I see students who create really good slideshows, and there are quite a few that could use a little work. And so, the purpose of this slideshow is to help impress upon you some of the mistakes that students use in creating slideshows and how we can make those more effective. So, undoubtedly, in your educational career, you've had to create a slideshow and give that in a presentation of some sort. And there are a lot of good techniques to keep your audience engaged. And there are a lot of ways that you can make a slideshow and give a presentation that make it difficult for your audience to actually understand what you're talking about. So, we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, these are some of the most common mistakes that I see my students make when it comes to creating presentations. The by far the most common mistake I see is people putting way too much stuff on one slide. So we'll talk about this in that in this presentation. Number two, creating slides that are too difficult to read. Number one and two kind of go together sometimes, but there's other reasons why it might be hard to understand or read a slide. Number three, lack of graphics. Number four, no title slide, which is a somewhat of a minor thing, but it can kind of be a big deal depending on your audience. Number five, not having enough on a slide. And then lastly, just that basics that I harp on all the time. Make sure that your spelling and grammar are correct in your writing, in your slideshows, and whatever else you're doing. So let's go ahead and talk about how we can work through some of these common mistakes and avoid them, and what our presentations should look like. So first of all, you should always have a title slide. Okay, your title slide should be somewhat engaging and easy to read. Of course, you should always have your the title on your slide, and it should be big enough and easy to read. Both of these slides are good examples of this. And then your name, the person who's presenting or the group name should be on there as well. And you can see both of these. I selected these from students as examples because they're good. They're intriguing slides. They kind of relate to the topic in some way. And as you're waiting to give your presentation, they can kind of engage the viewers, your audience, engage them a little bit with what you're going to be talking about. Next, so as we're talking about content, a few things to think about. We want to use bullets or short sentences. This goes back to not putting too much stuff on one slide. We don't want our slides to be too busy. So, bullets or short sentences, no paragraphs. We are not writing a paper here. This is a presentation. And so we want to create our presentation in such a way that when we give that presentation to people, we're using some of the information on the slide and some of the graphics to help our audience engage with what we're talking about. So if we want to write paragraphs, we should write a paper. That's not the point of a slideshow. So we want to limit the amount of information to just a few points per slide, right? We just want a few of those points per slide. We don't want to put too much information on each slide or it gets overwhelming for our audience. And we want to use easy to read fonts. So those are all relating back to some of the mistakes that I see people making. So here we have an example. I'm going to show you several examples of what to do and what not to do. This is an example from a chemistry slideshow, and I would say that it has way too much information. It's good information, but this is a boring slide. While the information is solid, there's too much here, and so we could make this better by spreading it out on a couple of different slides. You'll also notice it doesn't have any graphics, and we'll get to that later. But graphics help our audience engage with the information. Um, this is another example of what I see a lot with students and creating just a paragraph of information. So we really want to stay away from that for a couple of reasons. And the main reason being your audience is not going to engage with a paragraph format. They're not going to sit there, most likely, and read that information. To make this better, let's take that paragraph and put it into a couple of different bullets. And then when the presenter is presenting the information, they will use those bullets as talking points and add more information, and that'll make the slideshow more engaging. Another problem with slides like these is that often students will um, they will, instead of actually giving the presentation, interacting with their audience, they will just read the slides, because it's almost like this is their note sheet. Like, here's my information, I'm just going to read it off, and that's my presentation. And that's really not an effective presentation. We want to engage with our audience, give them eye contact. We want to help them see that we are connected with the material, and we're going to try to get them connected with what we're presenting by lots of different techniques, which I'm not really going to get into in this slideshow. So here's a good slide. Look at what it looks like. Okay. It's pretty well balanced. We have an image and we have some bullets that are great talking points. And then as a presenter, you could decide, am I going to talk about all of these different points in detail? Or maybe I'm just going to pick a few that I'm going to add some information to. This is a great list. It's about the right length, and none of those lines are too long. So it's easy for the audience to scan through that and pick up the information pretty quickly. Here's another example of a slide. This is a what not to do, right? You can just look at that and go, oh, that's, first of all, it's kind of boring, right? It's not very engaging. And then secondly, it's going to take me a long time to look at this slide and get the information from it. So this slide would be way better if we somehow formatted the information into categories, like boxes, or if we put in a few different bullets. You'll notice that there are several different universities noted here. And so we could just have a couple of different slides, and break this into two slides and talk about each college in its little section and briefly talk about the key points of that. The other thing about this slide, the font is too small. And so if I put this up, it's going to be very difficult for people in the back, or people that have limited visibility, vision issues. It's going to be harder for them to see. So we'll talk about font in just a little bit. And then the boringness, let's bring in some graphics. What could we do? Well, we have all these colleges on here. Maybe we put a picture of a mascot or a logo or something that is going to connect the audience and draw them in. And, we're visual people. We rely on our vision to make connections and learn, from the world around us. So when we have images included with information, it's always going to stick more. It's going to be more engaging and more effective. Here's a good example of a slide. Look at how easy this is, right? You've got a nice big graphic right in the middle, all right? And now we don't really know what this graphic specifically is. We can see down here that it talks about employment numbers, but as a presenter, you've got a nice big graphic here, and you can just say, hey, this is the employment numbers for this particular job, and the light is these colors. You could talk a lot about this, and it's nice and big for our audience to see. One thing I will note is that this is in green, and we want to be careful about greens and reds because of color blindness. And so, while that's not, our main concern, we do want to consider that kind of thing when we're creating graphics and images and stuff. So over here, I like this slide a lot because it's very, the font is consistent here, and it's also nice and big. So it's very easy for the audience to be like, oh, we can see the current employment rate, growth in the average salary there. So very easy to pick up information from this slide, not too much stuff. And there's a very good balance between the extra space here, not too much, but enough that the slide doesn't look too busy. So excellent example of an effective slide right here. What about fonts? We want to be careful with the fonts we use. Obviously, how do you know if it's a good font? You know because you set your computer up and you put the presentation on a screen and you back up and you look and see if you can read it. That's number one, right? Always practice, always check it for yourself. Have a friend or a trusted, person check it That's an effective technique to make sure that you're using the correct fonts and the correct point, the correct size. Okay. So good fonts to use. The ones I have on the left here: New Times Roman, Arial, Courier, Droid Sans. There's a lot more that you can use that are easy to read. Um, but you want to make sure they're the right size and that they are readable. And so if we look at some of the bad ones over here, the 14 point Arial here is, it works, but if I have people in the back of the audience, they're not going to be able to read that. So we want to make sure it's big enough that we can see, like this 18 point here. I'd recommend keeping your fonts at least 18 points. If you have to bump down to 16, that's all right. But 12 and 14 point font on a presentation is not going to cut it. Comic Sans, fun, informal. What is our audience? Always consider, who is this going to? Am I giving this to friends? Then yeah, add some fun stuff like that into it. Am I giving it to a professor as a project proposal? It needs to be more formal. So could use Comic Sans, be careful. And then any of these fonts that are cursive are always hard to read. Don't include those in presentations. Same thing with fonts like Impact. You can put those here and there, but don't use them for your bulleted points where people need to scan and be able to get that information very quickly. Okay. Another thing we need to consider is font colors. So the color choices you pick are important. You can see here, if I had like a blue background and I put yellow on top of that, that complement works pretty well together, and it's fairly easy to read because of the contrast. Whereas on this side on the right, if I put that red font on the blue background, it's actually pretty hard to read. You kind of have to strain your eyes. The colors almost blend together on the edges a little bit. And so if you're not really sure, again, have somebody look at it. We also want to be careful, like if you're using a dark blue background with a light blue font or vice versa, and the colors are similar to each other, we want there to be enough contrast that it's easy for our audience to see the information. Also, don't use too many different colors. Okay, we're not going to put 5 different colors of fonts on a slide. You keep your color variation to maybe 2, at max 3, if you have some really good reasons for doing that. So keep it pretty consistent throughout the slideshow as well. And then, like I said already, look at them, make sure you proof it, look at it from a distance and see how it looks. If it's hard to read for you on your computer from a distance, you probably need to change it and avoid those reds and greens for our colorblind people. Graphics, let's talk graphics a minute. Your presentation, your slideshow for your presentation. Okay, let me back up. There's 2 parts to your presentation: your portion, the visual part, the audio part, right, where you're talking and you're engaging with the audience, and then the slideshow, which is the second component to it. Your slideshow is the visual part. You are the audio part, okay, the auditory portion. So we want those to blend together. You need to have graphics on your slide. They connect your audience and they help them, as I said before, they help them engage with the material. So your slideshow, most of your slides should have some kind of graphic on them. Oh, um, so this is an example right here, right? Of, okay, we have some interesting little dots and colors, and so it's engaging a little bit because it looks nice, but there are no graphics on here to draw my audience in and help them connect with these schools, Yale and Brown. Okay, well, maybe again we put a couple of pictures of the campus, of the the logo, whatever, something that is visual that can connect our audience. Okay. Here's another one. So not a real complex or super engaging graphic, but just having that big bachelor degree with someone holding it, that's connecting our audience about what this whole slide is about. It's about college, right? It's about education. And so this whole slide is about that, and that particular graphic, which this person didn't take that picture, they just went and found it. It's what I would call like a generic picture, and they just use that as a way for the audience to engage with the information. Here's another great slide. We have some really good graphics here. Okay, it's a very clear graph where we have our median salary, And then there's a comment here, a bullet to say what the slide's already saying, um, and the average. And then we've got another, example here, and the color differentiation is really nice. So this is a good example. I would probably, if I was doing this slideshow, creating this slideshow, I would break it into two different slides, and make each one of these their own slide. Just that way you can make it nice and large, and for your audience, will be able to see it better and connect to the information more. If we have too much stuff again on one slide and it's too busy, your audience might just focus on one thing. Like my eyes are drawn here because there's a lot of color differentiation, and I might just miss this graph here. So it's good to break it up and think about how your audience is going to see this. But in essence, this is, if I broke this into two slides, it would be really good content for each one, because nice short bullet and very good graphic to help support what you're talking about. Be careful. This is a side note. All of your titles for your slides, you should have titles on all of your slides. If I scan back through this, you'll see, right? Required education, opportunities in the schools, job outlook. When you guys are putting your headers in, all important words in a title or a header, all of them should be capitalized. So like for this slide, job and outlook are important words. So those should both be capitalized. Okay, all of these letters are capitalized because of the font, and that's fine. Required education, both important words, both capitalized. So good. Demand should be capitalized here. So that's just something to be aware of. It's a minor thing, but it's the format that matters, and some of these details that make a difference sometimes. Okay. Again, back to my point, physical therapist, both capitalized here. Um, Last thing I'll kind of move into is the accuracy. One of the most important things, like, or the mistakes I said, was students not double checking for spelling and grammar mistakes. It's very easy in our world of texting, and even voice texting, to make mistakes and not catch them, because if you text a lot, you're not used to caring if your eyes are capitalized, or it does that for you. It automatically auto corrects your stuff, which is exciting sometimes and often annoying. But you can see here, minor mistake, the I should be capitalized. And so that, if you're giving a presentation, that makes you look like you lack attention to detail and you lose credibility as a presenter. I know we're going to make little mistakes here and there. That kind of stuff is inevitable. But some things are more obvious than others. And that, not capitalizing an I in your presentation, that should be a pretty obvious thing that needs to be fixed. How do you make sure that you've got all your spelling and grammatical mistakes? You have somebody check it. I'll keep telling you that, and I'll keep reminding you of that. This, on the end of this slideshow, I'll link this slideshow for you guys, but this is from a text on technical writing and presentations related to that. And so some of the information I got from here, but this has a little bit more information if you want to take a look at that. And then this is sort of like a rubric or a checklist that you might ask yourself when you are finished with your presentation. Do you have a heading? Do you have the right size of font? Can you read it well? Scanning down the list a little farther, have you used some special effects? Don't overdo the special effects. I didn't even get into like slide transitions and stuff, but if you have noises and stuff flying in all directions for every one of your bullets and stuff, that gets kind of annoying. So use it a little bit, but don't overdo your special effects on your slideshows. It takes the audience out of it, I think. So, or they just get so focused on, whoa, what's the next special effect going to be, and they're not even listening to you anymore. They just want to see what the next special effect is. Graphic sizes, avoiding too small. I didn't even talk about that. You don't want to put in graphics that are too small, or if they're overly complex, like a very complex graph, you might want to snip a piece of it out of that instead of having the whole thing in there. And again, number 10, avoiding grammatical errors. So this is a nice little checklist that you can use. And for those of you guys who are in my classes, I'll be posting this, of course. So just going back really quick to my top 10, things, or sorry, top 6 things. Whenever you're creating your slideshow, don't put too much on one slide. Make sure that it's easy to read. Make sure you put graphics in there. And I lacked a few graphics on this slideshow for some slides. So that's another point, is you may not be able to find a graphic that fits your slide. Don't just throw something in there to have a graphic. If it doesn't fit, don't put one in, but you shouldn't have very many slides that are graphic less. Make sure you have enough on each slides and check for spelling and grammar. I hope overall this helps you guys think about as you're creating your slideshow for your presentations. I hope this gives you some good tips on how to move forward and good examples. And by all means, if you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer. So be in touch. That's it for today. Have a good one. Let's go Ridge.